Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you were ready to put your life in their hands? And what if that very person dealt you the most painful blow? That's how my story began. Back then, I was just an ordinary third-year university student. Everything seemed to be in place. My studies, plans for the future, friends. Among them, one stood out, Andriy. We had met back in school, but our friendship truly blossomed during university. He always had a bunch of ideas, plans, and seemed like the kind of person you could overcome any obstacle with. One day, as we sat on a bench in the park after another lecture, Andriy said, "You know, we always stick together, and I'm sure our lives will be perfect as long as we never betray each other." I smiled at that moment. Why would he even say that? Could it ever be otherwise? From the very beginning of our acquaintance, he had a knack for charming people with his personality. Confident, friendly, always ready to help. But there was one thing about him that made me uneasy. Andriy could be too persuasive. He spoke in a way that made you believe even the most absurd story. Sometimes I caught myself thinking that he didn't always use this gift honestly. Once, during a student event, I overheard him talking about someone from our group. It wasn't just joking around, he was openly mocking that person. I was taken aback. Could this be the same Andriy who effortlessly got along with everyone? Well, it's just words, I excused him at the time. Yet deep down something told me that these little things might matter. But who pays attention to such warning signs when you have a friend you consider your right hand? Someone with whom you share all your joys and problems. At the time, I thought it was just an insignificant personality trait that would fade over time. If only I had known how wrong I was. Have you ever noticed small, troubling signals in close relationships? Perhaps you too have faced betrayal from someone you least expected? My friendship with Andriy wasn't just close. It became a part of my life. It felt like I'd found the brother I'd always wanted. We lived in dorm rooms next to each other and spent nearly every free moment together. Jokes, dreams, endless discussions about life. All of this became an inseparable part of our routine. Andriy always had big plans. One time, he enthusiastically described how we'd start our own business after finishing university. "We'll work together and we'll definitely succeed. The key is to stick by each other," he said, painting an imaginary picture of our success. And I believed him. I believed every word he said. One reason we became so close was that I saw him as a source of support. For instance, when my mom got sick, I didn't know who to turn to. Hospitals, medical bills, constant fear, it was overwhelming. Andriy was there during those days. He helped raise money, found volunteers, and even lent me his savings to pay for her medication. At that moment I thought, this is what a true friend looks like. Can you imagine someone standing by your side when it feels like your entire world is falling apart? Someone who convinces you that everything will be okay, even when you don't believe it yourself. That's who Andriy was for me. There's one story that stands out in my memory. One evening I was walking back from the library. The weather was awful, cold rain had turned the road into a mess of puddles. As I trudged back to the dorm, I saw 3 guys standing around Andriy. They looked aggressive, waving their hands and shouting. I didn't know what was going on, but something in my gut told me it wasn't good. Without thinking, I rushed over. "What's going on here?" I asked, trying to sound confident even though I was shaking inside. One of the guys turned to me and mumbled something harsh. Andriy grabbed my arm and quietly said, "Let's get out of here. They won't do anything." We walked back to the dorm and I pressed him for answers. "What happened back there?" He brushed it off. "Just some idiots looking for a fight. Don't worry about it." But I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't telling me everything. His voice was uneasy and his expression was nervous, like someone hiding something. Still, I convinced myself it was nothing. After all, who else but Andriy was my friend, my rock? We were inseparable even in the smallest things. Group projects, trips to the countryside, nights with guitars by the fire. Once, during my birthday celebration, Andriy made a toast that moved me to tears. "Brother, you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. If anyone ever tries to hurt you, I'll destroy them." His words felt so genuine that I couldn't imagine they'd ever turn against me. But even then, as I now realize, there were small, almost imperceptible cracks in his behavior. For example, we had a habit of sharing every little detail of our lives. I always told him everything, from silly incidents to deep worries. But when I asked about him, he often dodged the question or joked it away. "Nothing interesting," was his favorite phrase. It seemed odd, but I didn't think much of it. Once, I noticed that some of my ideas started coincidentally being discussed by other people. For instance, I shared with him an idea for an article I wanted to write for the university magazine. A few days later, I overheard someone talking about it as if it was their own. Andriy even joked, "Maybe we've got spies around here?" Now, looking back, I realized those were the warning signs I stubbornly ignored. Because how could I suspect someone I called a brother? Have you ever turned a blind eye to such things? When something about a friend's behavior feels off, but your trust in them is so strong that you refuse to believe the worst. Friendship is when you can entrust someone with the most important parts of your life. But what do you do when your life starts to fall apart because of the person you trusted more than yourself? It all began when Oksana came into my life. We met at a university event, and from the first moment I knew she was different. Her eyes radiated warmth, and her smile was so captivating I could have looked at it forever. We started talking, and soon something deeper sparked between us. It felt right from the very beginning. Andriy supported me. He even joked that I had finally grown up. Oksana seemed to like him too. We went for coffee a few times, laughed, and talked about life. Everything seemed perfect. I had a best friend, a girlfriend, and my life finally felt complete. One day, Andriy came to me with an idea. He was working on a business project for a university competition but didn't have a solid plan. "You know, I've always admired the way you think," he said. "Help me refine the project. If we win, we'll split the prize money 50-50. It sounded great. We spent hours discussing the idea. I created the strategy, developed the presentation, and even came up with ways to impress the judges. We worked together day and night, and I was convinced this would be our joint success. Meanwhile, my relationship with Oksana deepened. But one day, I noticed changes in her behavior. She became distant, responded to messages briefly, and rarely initiated meetings. When I tried to ask what was wrong, she just said everything was fine. The turning point came when Andriy suggested celebrating the submission of our project. He said Oksana would join us and even invited her himself. At the celebration, she seemed tense, but I chalked it up to fatigue. However, I couldn't ignore the way Andriy and Oksana exchanged warm glances that were too familiar. After that evening, Oksana almost disappeared from my life. She stopped answering calls, and when I finally saw her, she was cold. "I think we need a break," she said, and her words felt like a knife to the heart. I didn't know how to react. At first, I blamed myself, searching for reasons. But then, in the dorm, I overheard two girls talking about Andriy. They laughed. "It's unbelievable. How did he convince her to leave her boyfriend? He's a real manipulator." I froze. Could they be talking about Oksana? Could Andriy, my best friend, have destroyed my relationship? I decided to confront him. "Andriy, do you know why Oksana's been distant?" I asked. His response was too calm. "No idea. Maybe she's just tired of everything." But I couldn't trust him anymore. The next day, I went to a cafe near campus by chance, and my heart stopped. Andriy was there with Oksana. They talked as if nothing was out of the ordinary, but her gaze held the warmth that had once been only for me. I stood frozen in the doorway. When Andriy noticed me, his expression changed. He tried to stand up, but I just waved him off and walked away. That evening, I checked my email to see the status of our business project. And what did I find? Andriy had submitted it under his name. Without me. He took everything, my idea, my hard work, and now my relationship. This wasn't just betrayal, it was war. Have you ever had a moment when you realized the person you trusted with all your heart had become your enemy? What would you have done in my place? I sat in an empty room, staring out the window at a world that seemed so alive. But to me, it no longer felt like my world. Andriy's betrayal hung over me like a curse I couldn't shake. That night, I didn't sleep. My mind churned with questions I couldn't answer. How could he do this? What did I do to deserve this? Eventually, I decided I couldn't keep running from the truth. I needed to get to the bottom of it. The next day, I worked up the courage to confront Andriy. He was in his room, sitting calmly at his laptop as if nothing had happened. When I walked in, he looked up and smiled nonchalantly. "Hey, what's wrong?" "You look terrible," he said as if nothing was amiss. I sat down across from him, feeling the blood pounding in my veins. "Andriy, tell me the truth. Did you submit our project under your name? And what's going on with Oksana?" For a moment, his face stiffened, but he quickly replaced it with his usual smile. "The project? Oh, come on, you know it's just a formality. I was planning to tell them it was a team effort. It just worked out this way. And Oksana? What are you even saying? You're my brother. I'd never do something like that, but I already knew the truth. His excuses rang hollow. His words were insincere. And that's when I did what I should have done a long time ago. I stopped holding back. Andriy, you betrayed me. You took my idea, my hard work, and now Oksana. What else will you take from me? His smile vanished, replaced by a coldness in his eyes. He stood abruptly, leaned toward me and said, "Calm down. The world isn't as simple as you think. If you can't be strong, don't be surprised when others take advantage of your weakness." Those words hit me like a dagger to the heart. Weakness. Was my trust a weakness? Was kindness always destined to be punished? I left his room, unwilling to hear another word. But the worst was yet to come. Later that day, I got a message from Oksana. "We need to talk." I didn't want to. I didn't want to hear her voice, see her face, or feel the pain she had caused me. But I couldn't avoid the truth. We met in a small park near the university. She looked guilty yet calm. "I know you figured it all out," she began. "What?" "I just want to know why you did it," I asked, my voice almost pleading. Oksana sighed and looked away. "It's complicated." Andriy was so convincing. He told me you were too naive, that you could never provide stability, that he could offer me more. I don't know how it happened, but I believed him. "I'm so sorry." Sorry. The word felt like mockery. She hadn't just betrayed me, she had bought into the lies Andriy had so masterfully spun. I couldn't listen anymore. "You made your choice. Now live with it," I said, and walked away without looking back. That was the moment my world truly collapsed. The friend I had considered a brother. The woman I had loved. They both stripped everything away from me in a single day. But was this the end? No. It was the beginning of something new. The beginning of a fight for myself. Because now I knew, you can't trust everyone, even those who call you brother or promise you love. What would you have done in my place? Could you forgive the people who broke your heart like this? After that meeting with Oksana, I felt empty. Everything hurt, not just my heart but every part of my being. I wanted to hide from the world, erase Andriy and Oksana from my life. But instead I decided to act. I needed answers. Deep down, I suspected that Andriy hadn't stopped at just taking my project and my relationship. I began recalling little details, our conversations, his jokes, casual mentions of money that I had ignored before. Now all those fragments started forming a horrifying picture. One evening, unsure of where to start, I walked into Andriy's dorm room. He wasn't there, but his roommate, Serhiy, was playing a computer game. "Hey Serhiy, do you know anything about Andriy and that business project we worked on?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Serhiy glanced at me briefly and laughed. "The project? Oh yeah, he's convinced the whole university it's his genius idea. He even said he did it all by himself. Did you guys work on it together or something?" I said nothing. His words were like a hammer smashing the fragile wall of hope I'd been clinging to. But it got worse. "You know, he even went to one of the professors to push his presentation for the competition. Said he had all the contacts to turn it into a real business. You guys here are all ambitious, but Andriy seems to be the slickest of the lot," Serhiy added, turning back to his game. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Andriy hadn't just betrayed me, he was selling my idea as his own, boasting of connections he didn't even have. That night, I resolved to uncover the full truth. I started digging into the competition details and found the participant list. Of course, Andriy's name was there. I printed out documents proving the idea had been shared. But that wasn't even the worst part. As I sat at my laptop, a message came through from a classmate, Maxim. "Hey, did you hear Andriy invested money into some new venture? They say he's got serious startup capital. Is it true he won a grant?" Money. The grant. Andriy. I realized this wasn't just a betrayal. He had used my trust and my work for personal profit. The next day, I visited the university office that organized the competition. I needed to know how Andriy got the funding. There, I discovered he had already signed a contract with one of the sponsoring companies, giving him access to significant funds to develop the project. My anger boiled over. He hadn't stopped at just taking credit, he was profiting from it. That evening, I decided to confront Oksana again. I needed help. But when I arrived at her place, she looked surprised. "What do you want?" she asked coldly, but there was a flicker of anxiety in her eyes. "I know Andriy betrayed me, not just with you but with my project. He stole everything I worked for. You know this, don't you?" Oksana lowered her head. At first she was silent. Then she admitted, "He promised me I'd be part of it. He said we'd work together, that I could help him with the organization. He convinced me you couldn't handle it. I didn't know it would go this far." "This far?" I nearly shouted. "You have no idea how far it's gone." Oksana started crying, saying she was sorry, but her words meant nothing to me anymore. They couldn't give me back my idea, my relationships, or my trust. That was the breaking point. I decided I wouldn't let him destroy what was left of my life. I would expose him, show everyone who he really was. What would you have done in my situation? Would you fight for justice even if it meant risking everything? When betrayal comes to light, it cuts like a wound. But when you discover how deep it runs, it feels more like a mortal blow. I realized I couldn't endure it in silence anymore. It was time to act. The next day, I went to the university committee overseeing the competition. I needed more details, more evidence. There, I gained access to a copy of Andriy's submission. I read through every word, every page, and felt my anger ignite further with each line. It was my work, word for word. He hadn't even bothered to change the phrasing or tweak the ideas. But the worst part lay at the bottom of the document. There, it listed the funding amount he had already received, $10,000. He hadn't just stolen my idea, he had profited from it. I knew a confrontation alone wouldn't be enough. His audacity was so blatant that remaining silent would have meant accepting defeat. I gathered every document I had that proved my contribution to the project. Drafts, notes from our brainstorming sessions, even photos of us working together. But that was only part of my plan. I decided to strike him where it would hurt the most, his pride. That evening, I went to the sponsoring company that had granted the funding. It was a large firm, and I was fortunate to meet the project manager overseeing the competition. I laid out all my evidence, explaining exactly how Andriy had claimed my work as his own. At first, the manager was cautious and skeptical, but as he reviewed the documents and compared them to Andriy's submission, his expression shifted. "This is serious," he said. "If all of this checks out, we can revoke his funding and take further action." I went home feeling like a small weight had been lifted. Something was finally moving in the right direction. But it wasn't enough. Andriy needed to know that I knew the truth, and he had to see his mask fall apart. The next morning, I waited until he went to class before heading to a lecture hall where many of our classmates were gathered. Standing before them, I said, "Friends, I want to tell you about how our project, mine and Andriy's, came to be." The room filled with confused murmurs. Many had already heard about Andriy's success. I explained everything, how we had worked together, how I had created the core ideas, and how he had claimed it all as his own. At first there was silence. Then the murmurs grew louder as outrage spread. Andriy entered the room mid-speech, clearly startled. His confident demeanor faltered as he realized what was happening. "What are you saying?" he snapped, trying to regain control. "This was my idea. You're just jealous because I did what you never could." But I was prepared. I pulled out the documents proving that every idea, every draft, had come from me. Jealousy? These are the facts, Andriy. You know the truth is on my side. He grew agitated, scrambling for excuses, but our classmates were no longer buying it. That conflict became the talk of the day. But the real victory came later that evening when I received an email from the sponsoring company. They informed me that they had revoked Andriy's funding due to ethical violations. The next day, Andriy approached me. He was no longer the confident and domineering person I once knew. There was fear in his eyes. "Why did you do this? We could have split everything 50-50. You've ruined everything." "Split?" I repeated. "You betrayed me. You took my work, my trust, and even tried to take the person I loved. You've already taken far more than you deserve." He didn't respond and simply walked away. It felt like a victory, but I knew deep down it wasn't over. Betrayal on this scale leaves scars, even when the truth finally comes to light. Would you have the courage to confront a betrayer so openly? Or would you choose a different path? It seemed like everything was over. The truth was out. Andriy lost his sponsorship, and his reputation at the university was in ruins. But inside I still felt an empty ache. The betrayal I'd suffered had changed me forever, and even though I had exposed his lies, satisfaction eluded me. A few days later, Oksana asked to meet me. She looked unsettled, almost frightened. Her hands trembled as she handed me a note. "You need to see this," she said, avoiding my gaze. The note contained a short message. You don't understand what you've gotten yourself into. This isn't just about business. If you keep going, you'll regret it." I looked at her. "Did Andriy write this?" She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I didn't know it would go this far," she said. "He told me that if I told you anything more, he'd find a way to ruin my life too." It was another blow. Andriy wasn't just a brazen liar, he was dangerous. I realized he wouldn't back down easily. The next day I saw him at the university. He no longer looked defeated or ashamed. Instead, his eyes carried a dangerous glint that sent a chill down my spine. "You think you've won?" he said when I approached him. "But this is just the beginning. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Really? Or maybe you don't know who you're dealing with," I replied, trying to mask my nerves. But his words stayed with me. What exactly was he capable of? That evening I decided to talk to Serhiy, his roommate. I needed to understand what Andriy had been up to and what else he was planning. "Look, Serhiy," I said. "You know I'm not asking these questions for nothing. I need the truth. What do you know about Andriy and what he's been doing?" At first, Serhiy dodged the questions, but after I assured him I'd keep his name out of it, he opened up. "Andriy's always been sly. He knows how to manipulate people. This isn't the first time he's used someone. Before you there were others. One girl, he stole money from her saying it was for a project, but he never paid her back. Others, he just got them to do his work for him. He lives off people like you. But now you're a problem for him because you're the first one who didn't break." Those words lit a fire in me. Andriy had been exploiting people, betraying them, and leaving behind a trail of hurt and disappointment. I realized he wouldn't stop. His threats and his master manipulator act were just the tip of the iceberg. If I wanted to end this, I had to act not just boldly but carefully. The next day, I went to the university administration and filed a formal complaint, attaching all the evidence I had, including the threats. It caused a major stir. Andriy was summoned to a disciplinary hearing. I remember him sitting there, pretending to be confident. But with each word I spoke, with each piece of evidence I presented, his composure cracked. He tried to defend himself, claiming it was all a smear campaign fueled by jealousy. But his excuses sounded hollow against the mountain of facts. In the end, the committee disqualified him from the competition and began an investigation into his actions. But even then, I knew it wasn't over. Andriy wasn't someone who gave up easily. As he walked past me after the hearing, he leaned in and whispered, "You think you've won? We'll see who's laughing in the end." Those were his final words to me, but they left behind an ominous feeling. I didn't know what he had planned, but I knew one thing. I couldn't afford to trust even his shadow. What do you think? Can people like this be confronted without losing yourself? Is it worth fighting back even if it puts you in danger? After the disciplinary hearing, I finally felt like the truth had prevailed. Andriy had been exposed, and it seemed that justice had been served. But can life really be that simple? My lingering naivety, even after all these events, led me to an even greater disappointment. A few days after Andriy was disqualified from the competition, I started receiving strange messages. Unknown numbers sent short, cryptic texts. "Your celebration won't last long. Trust is easy to manipulate. You have no idea who's behind this." At first, I thought it was just an attempt to scare me, another one of Andriy's tricks. But things quickly escalated. One day when I returned home after classes, I found an envelope under my door. Inside was a printed record of my conversations with Oksana, all our personal messages, even ones I never wanted to see again. At the bottom of the envelope was a note. "This is just the beginning. If you don't want everyone to see this, stay away." It felt like a stab in the back. How had this happened? Who could have accessed my private data? The sense of danger I had tried to suppress after Andriy's betrayal reignited with full force. I went to Oksana to see if she knew anything. When I arrived at her apartment, she looked terrified, her eyes red from crying. "I knew this would happen," she said before I could even ask a question. "What do you mean? What are you talking about, Oksana?" She sat down on the couch, holding her head in her hands. "Andriy, he's not who he seems to be. You think he did all this alone? No. He has connections, people who support him because he helps them with their schemes. This isn't just about the project or the competition. It's much bigger, and he dragged me into it too." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "What do you mean by schemes? What exactly are you talking about?" Oksana explained that Andriy had been working with a group of people who used the university as a platform for their schemes. money laundering, grant fraud, even document forgery. His win in the competition was meant to be another step in their larger plan. But when you started speaking up, they decided you were a problem. Now Andriy isn't just trying to protect himself. He's trying to fulfill the promises he made to them, she added. Her words left me stunned. This was bigger than I had imagined. Andriy hadn't just betrayed me. He had dragged me into a dangerous game I hadn't even realized I was part of. Why are you telling me this? I asked, struggling to suppress my anger. Because I can't stay silent anymore, she replied. But you need to understand that this is dangerous. They'll do anything to stop you if you keep pushing. I returned home with mixed emotions. On one hand, I was terrified. This was no longer a personal vendetta between Andriy and me. It was something much bigger, much darker. On the other hand, I knew I couldn't back down. The next day, I called Maxim, one of our classmates who had access to the university archives. I asked him to find everything he could about the other projects Andriy had been involved in. What he uncovered was shocking. It turned out this wasn't the first time Andriy had been involved in something shady. He had won grants in other competitions, and each time there were suspicious elements. Recycled ideas, missing documentation, and in some cases, sudden disappearances of collaborators. This information was my chance. I decided to present it to the university administration and the companies that had worked with Andriy. But before doing that, I knew I had to confront him one last time. This time, our meeting was different. I was no longer the naive friend who wanted to believe in the best. I saw an enemy in front of me. Andriy, you've left me no choice, I said when we met in a quiet cafe. He smiled, but the confidence in his eyes was gone. You think this will change anything? They'll destroy you if you keep going, he said. Maybe, I replied. But at least you won't be able to use anyone else. His smile faded. He knew I wouldn't stop. Now I had everything, the truth, evidence, and even the support of a few others who had also been manipulated by him. But was I ready for what was to come? What would you do in my place? Is it worth risking everything to expose injustice, or is it better to walk away and start fresh? When I submitted all the evidence to the university administration and the sponsoring company, it seemed like justice had finally prevailed. Andriy lost the grant, his reputation among professors and students was destroyed, and the university launched an investigation into his previous projects. But I quickly realized that this success came with a cost. My life began to change in the worst ways. It started with small things. I noticed people watching me. In class, in the cafeteria, even in the dormitory, I felt unfamiliar eyes on me. One night, there was a knock on my door, but when I opened it, no one was there. Then came the strange phone calls. Unknown numbers called me late at night. When I picked up, there was only silence on the other end. At first, I dismissed it as a coincidence, but after the fifth or sixth time, I knew it wasn't. My fears were confirmed one evening when I returned to my room and found my belongings scattered everywhere. Nothing was stolen, but my notes, electronic files, and even my personal journal had been rifled through. Someone was clearly looking for information. The next day, I received a text message from an unknown number. Think you've won? This is just the beginning. I was gripped with fear. Was it Andriy? Or the people behind him? But I knew there was no turning back now. How would you handle such a situation? Would you continue to fight even if it meant risking your safety, or would you choose to walk away to protect yourself? Feeling increasingly threatened, I decided I had to dig deeper. If Andriy was just one piece of something bigger, I needed to uncover the full picture. I turned to Maxim, the classmate who had previously helped me find information on Andriy's past projects. We began analyzing all of Andriy's wins in university competitions over the past few years. At first, everything seemed ordinary, but the deeper we dug, the more inconsistencies we found. It turned out that several grants Andriy had received in the past were funded by the same company. This was odd since that company wasn't an official university sponsor. Maxim speculated that the company might be running a shadowy funding scheme. We uncovered its name, Verix Invest. Searching for information online yielded little, just vague descriptions of its activities and a few articles hinting at dubious business dealings. Then I made a critical move. Through a contact, I gained access to the university's grant database. There, I found documents confirming that Verix Invest had funded several competition winners, many of whom had produced questionable projects, or whose projects disappeared entirely after the money was awarded. Suddenly, everything clicked. Andriy wasn't acting alone. he was part of a chain. His role was to help the company secure grants through fake projects. He created convincing stories, targeted trusting individuals like me, and used their work to win funding. It became clear that I'd stumbled into something much larger than a simple betrayal by a friend. I decided to push forward. With all the evidence I'd gathered, I drafted a letter to the university administration, outlining Verix Invest's involvement in the grant schemes. But before sending it, I wanted to confront Andriy directly. I needed to hear the truth from him. I found him in a cafe near the university. He looked tired, but he still tried to maintain his usual air of confidence. "I know you work for Verix Invest," I said bluntly. His expression changed. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. "How do you know that?" he asked, trying to remain composed. "It doesn't matter anymore. I know how you used me, how you exploited others, and how you and that company stole money. But it ends now." He leaned toward me, clenching his fists. "You have no idea what you're getting into. These people won't stop. Do you think they'll let you expose everything? They'll destroy you, your reputation, your life. Walk away while you still can." But I wasn't afraid anymore. This had become more than just a personal fight. It was about justice. When I got home, I sent my letter to the university administration along with all the documents I'd collected. I also decided to contact journalists to bring the story into the public eye. It was a risky move, but I knew that if the truth remained hidden, Andriy and the people behind him would continue deceiving and exploiting others. The next day I received another message. "Your time is running out. We're close." The fear returned, but this time it strengthened my resolve. What would you do in my place? Would you fight to the end, knowing you could lose everything? Or would you step back to protect your own safety? The realization that I had stepped into something dangerous kept me on edge. After sending my letter to the university administration and journalists, I waited anxiously for a response. But instead, I was met with silence. No confirmations, no feedback. While this was unsettling, I decided to keep moving forward. The next day, I was summoned to the university. The room was heavy with tension, filled with members of the administration, including the dean, the competition supervisor, and several professors I knew personally. "We've reviewed your materials," the dean began, flipping through the documents in front of him. "If this is true, it's an extremely serious matter. But you must understand that such allegations, without additional evidence, could jeopardize the university's reputation." His words made me tense. Were they trying to avoid responsibility? Or were they simply afraid to acknowledge the truth? "I understand the risks," I replied, trying to sound confident. "But you know the university can't turn a blind eye to this. You have all the documents. If you investigate the financial transactions involving Verix Invest, you'll see that what I'm saying is true." The dean sighed and stood up. "We'll begin an investigation, but you must be prepared for this to take time. I'd also advise you to keep everything confidential until we reach a conclusion." I nodded, though doubt gnawed at me. Were they truly going to act, or was this just a stalling tactic? When I returned to my dorm, I found yet another gift. On my desk lay a new envelope containing photos of me taken at various locations. Outside the university, in the cafeteria, even in my dorm room through an open window. On the back of one photo was a chilling note. "You think the truth will save you? It will destroy you." Panic gripped me. This was no longer just psychological pressure. It was a direct threat. I decided to call Oksana, hoping she could shed more light on the situation. When she answered, her voice was shaky. "You should have left this alone," she said. "Now you've made yourself a target. What do they want from me? What is this really about?" I asked, trying to keep calm. "They don't care about the truth. They want silence. They'll destroy anyone who threatens their plans. If you don't stop, they'll find a way to make you disappear." Her words were a final warning, but I had already gone too far to turn back. I decided it was time to involve the police. This was my last hope, as the stakes were now too high. The following day, I went to the local police station. I filed a report, attaching all the documents, messages, and photographs I had. The detective listening to me initially seemed indifferent, but his demeanor shifted when I showed him the threatening messages. "This is serious," he said. "We'll open an investigation, but you need to be very careful." The investigation dragged on for weeks, and during that time, I lived in constant fear. Every phone call or step behind me felt like a potential threat. But finally the truth began to emerge. The police uncovered that Varick's Invest was indeed part of a larger criminal network, involving not just grant fraud but also money laundering through university projects. Andriy, as it turned out, was just one link in this chain, but his activities were key to exposing the wider scheme. He was arrested, along with several others involved in the operation. Surprisingly, they left me alone. This was one of the hardest experiences of my life. It taught me that fighting for the truth can be dangerous, but it's worth it. Sometimes the people we trust the most can inflict the deepest wounds. But it's through those experiences that we grow stronger. To those reading this, thank you for supporting this story. If you've faced similar challenges in your life, please share them in the comments. Your experiences might serve as a lesson or a source of support for others. Thank you for your attention and for standing by me. Your support means the world to me. If you notice any mistakes or inaccuracies in the text, please let me know. It will help us improve the content even more. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.